Welcome back. Once you've obtained the key information to help in the planning and pre-production of your data story, it's time to think about how to put that information together for your final deliverable. You may find that the stakeholders' goals, intended audience's interests, and the data that you are working with do not perfectly align. Your job is to align, prioritize, and optimize these factors in your data story. For example, does the data actually provide the information and level of detail to meet the goals of the stakeholders and the user's needs? After this lesson, you will be able to apply all the pre-production concepts to set your design priorities. Let's take a look. The most effective way to present your data story depends on the interplay of different considerations and questions to ask yourself and sometimes others. As you go through your project, the requirements, priorities, resources, and goals may evolve. Your checklist, however, can help you stay on top of those changes and keep the different aspects of your project in alignment with each other. Let's revisit a few of these considerations. The purpose and context of the presentation. Do you want to actively persuade members of your audience to arrive at a previously determined conclusion, or alternatively, do you want your story to be a starting point for an open-ended discussion? Or perhaps the conclusions from your data story are unexpected or inconclusive. What do you do in those instances? You'll be in a much better position to pivot to a different approach if you have a clear sense of the path you have taken up to that point. Timing and narrative control. If there's only a short window of time available to present your data story, then you will probably want to provide a very well-defined story arc with a beginning, middle, and end, and limited to the bare amount of necessary crucial details. On the other hand, a longer, more open-ended narration with some interactivity and more details can also work very well. Format. The considerations I just mentioned feed into the issue of format. It could range from a lightly scripted narration of an interactive dashboard to a tightly scripted printed report or slideshow. Look at this summary of considerations. Where do you envision your project landing on this chart? Again, you may find that the position on the chart may change over time based on new inputs during your project. Now, the 3 C's provide a way to help you be disciplined and focused in your storytelling throughout your project, and it can be helpful to begin a preliminary version as soon as possible. But that doesn't mean you can't revise and revisit those 3 C's as you go. If the story's outcome is still to be determined, you might at least jot down an initial context and an initial challenge, and then perhaps a few alternate trajectories or options for how the story gets resolved or concluded. As we've seen in previous lessons, you may find that sometimes all the necessary data may not be available to tell the story as initially envisioned. You may find that you need to either acquire additional data sources to complete your story or reframe your story so that it accurately expresses what's there in the data and also effectively connects with your audience. It may be that you have to modify the framing of the story based on what you've learned in your interviews, for example. It's all a balancing act where the inputs should be considered, weighed, and addressed all together as well as possible. For example, meeting the requirements of the stakeholders but failing to connect with the audience is not a story of success. Now, Tableau offers a relatively quick and easy way to explore data, as we've seen, and to organize your story with story points and also iterate on that entire process. You should also think about the level of detail that will be most effective to your story. Recall that there's no simple formula for simplicity. It really depends on the eyes of the beholders. Albert Einstein is reputed to have said, "Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler." This is an important point when you're planning your visualization. It may be simpler to show your intended audiences only monthly sales data, but in fact, they really need to see the weekly breakdowns. Does the data exist to show that level of detail? And does it align with the tactical and strategic goals and constraints of the stakeholders? These are all kinds of questions that you may find yourself needing to ask and answer while navigating your design choices. The key is determining the priorities, and that's where your planning and pre-production work can really pay off. Now the question is how to present that arc in the most effective way possible for the intended audience. There's no single correct answer, but in another module we can look at data stories told by a range of people for inspiration to see how they approached it and draw some inspiration for our own projects. Thanks for listening.